Federal Judge Elise Montgomery sits frozen in first class, phone in hand, as armed air marshals board the plane. Passengers whisper and stare. Minutes earlier, flight attendant Connor Williams had forcefully pushed her toward economy, insisting, "Your kind doesn't belong in first class." One phone call changed everything. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed discrimination in public spaces. Have you ever wondered what happens when someone with real power gets mistreated? Let's find out what happens when the wrong person gets pushed too far. Judge Elise Montgomery adjusted her navy blue blazer as she stepped onto SkyWest Airlines Flight 3792. After 15 years on the federal bench, the 52-year-old jurist had developed a routine for her frequent flights between Chicago and Washington, D.C. Today's trip was particularly important. She was scheduled to deliver the keynote address at a judicial conference addressing bias in the American legal system. "Good afternoon," she smiled at the flight attendant positioned at the entrance to the aircraft. The young man, whose name tag read Connor Williams, barely glanced at her boarding pass before his expression shifted from professional to suspicious. "First class is to the left," he said, his tone implying she had misunderstood. "Yes, I know." "Thank you," Elise replied, presenting her first-class boarding pass that clearly showed her seat assignment. 2A, window seat, first class. Connor's eyes narrowed as he examined her boarding pass with unusual scrutiny. He turned it over, checking for something, then handed it back with obvious reluctance. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" he asked, despite the evidence in his hand. Elise had experienced this particular brand of skepticism countless times throughout her distinguished career. "Yes, I'm quite sure," she responded evenly, her voice calm but firm. "Seat 2A." She moved toward first class, feeling Connor's eyes following her. As she stored her carry-on in the overhead compartment and settled into her seat, she observed Connor's interaction with the passengers who boarded after her. A white businessman in jeans and a casual button-down received a warm, "Welcome aboard." His boarding pass received only a cursory glance before Connor ushered him through with a friendly pat on the shoulder. The contrast wasn't lost on Elise, but she had long ago mastered the art of maintaining her dignity in the face of such treatment. Her father, one of the prestigious Tuskegee Airmen, had taught her to choose her battles wisely. "Not every slight deserves your energy," he used to say. "Save your strength for the fights that matter." She watched as more passengers filtered in. A white woman with platinum blonde hair was directed to first class without Connor checking her boarding pass at all. An elderly white man with a cane received immediate assistance. Then another black passenger, a young man in a tailored suit, received the same treatment as Elise. Multiple checks of his boarding pass and questioning before being allowed to proceed to his seat in economy. The passenger who took the aisle, seat across from Elise, was a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit. His boarding pass received the same cursory check as the other white passengers. He nodded politely to Elise as he sat down, then immediately opened his laptop. Elise glanced at his open computer screen and noticed the logo of Keller Technologies, a major software company. The name Thomas Keller, CEO, was displayed on his email signature. She recognized him from business magazines. He was indeed the founder and chief executive of a Fortune 500 company. Connor returned to the first-class cabin, offering pre-flight beverages to the passengers. "Mr. Keller, what can I get for you? Champagne, perhaps? Or your usual scotch on the rocks?" It was clear Connor recognized the tech CEO and had served him before. Thomas Keller requested water with lemon, which Connor promptly fetched. Then Connor systematically worked his way through the first-class cabin, taking drink orders from everyone, except Elise. When he had served everyone else, and was about to return to the galley, Elise raised her hand slightly. "Excuse me," she said. "May I have some water, please?" Connor turned, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. "We're about to complete the boarding process, ma'am. I'll get to you during the main beverage service after takeoff." Elise noticed Thomas Keller glance up from his laptop, a small furrow appearing between his brows as he observed the interaction. He looked as if he might say something, but then returned his attention to his screen. Elise took a deep breath. This was familiar territory. The subtle digs, the different standards of service, the implicit message that she didn't belong in first class despite having paid the same fare as everyone else. She had dealt with it on airlines, in restaurants, in courthouses before she was a known figure. As the economy section filled up, Elise discreetly took out her phone and made a few notes, times, names, specifics of the interactions. It was a habit she'd developed during her early days as a civil rights attorney, long before ascending to the federal bench. Document everything. Facts matter. The flight was scheduled for 2 hours. Elise hoped the rest of it would proceed without incident. She had important notes to review for her keynote address. The conference topic, addressing implicit bias in judicial proceedings, felt increasingly relevant with each passing minute on this aircraft. The captain announced they were ready for departure. The safety demonstration proceeded normally, though Elise noticed that Connor avoided eye contact with her throughout. As the plane taxied toward the runway, she gazed out the window at the Chicago skyline. She thought of her father again, of how proud he would be to see his daughter as a federal judge. He had fought for a country that segregated him, flew planes, for an air force that relegated him to separate facilities. The arc of history bends toward justice, he used to tell her, quoting Dr. King. But sometimes we need to give it a little push. She didn't know yet how prophetic those words would prove to be on this particular flight. 40 minutes into the flight, the main beverage service began. Connor worked his way methodically through the first-class cabin, starting with the passengers across the aisle. He served Thomas Keller first, presenting him with a napkin embossed with the airline logo, followed by his requested sparkling water with a wedge of lime balanced carefully on the edge of the glass. "Can I get you anything else, Mr. Keller?" Connor asked solicitously. "Perhaps some of our cheese and fruit plate? We have an excellent aged cheddar today." "No, thank you," Thomas replied, not looking up from his spreadsheet analysis. Connor continued through the cabin, providing each passenger with attentive service. A napkin placed just so, drinks served with a flourish, offers of additional snacks or comfort items. When he finally reached Elise, his demeanor changed, visibly. He thrust a napkin onto her tray table and placed a plastic cup of water beside it. No ice, no lemon, unlike the other passengers' drinks. "Anything else?" he asked curtly, already turning away. "May I have some ice, please?" Elise asked. Connor's jaw tightened. "We're running low on ice. I need to save it for the rest of the service." Elise glanced around at the other passengers. Drinks, all generously filled with ice. Rather than challenge the obvious falsehood, she simply said, "I see. Thank you anyway." As Connor moved away, Elise noticed Thomas Keller watching the interaction with increasing discomfort. He met her eyes briefly, and she saw recognition there. Not of her as Judge Montgomery, but recognition of what was happening. Yet he remained, silent, returning to his work. Elise sipped her tepid water and returned to reviewing her notes for the conference. The keynote she was preparing to deliver included several anecdotes about how implicit bias manifests in everyday interactions, how differential treatment often occurs in subtle ways that leave the recipient questioning whether bias is actually at play. The irony wasn't lost on her. An hour into the flight, Elise needed to use the restroom. She noticed the light indicating the first-class lavatory was unoccupied. She unbuckled her seatbelt and made her way forward. As she approached the lavatory, Connor stepped into her path. "Excuse me," he said loudly enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "The first-class lavatory is reserved for first class, passengers only." Elise maintained her composure. "I am a first-class passenger, seat 2A. Connor's expression didn't change. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again." "My boarding pass is at my seat," Elise replied calmly. "But as you can see, I was seated in the first-class cabin, seat 2A, by the window." "Ma'am, I can't let you use this facility without verifying your ticket. There are lavatories available in the economy section." His voice carried an edge of authority that was clearly meant to intimidate. Several first-class passengers looked up, watching the interaction. Thomas Keller had stopped typing. "I am a first-class passenger," Elise repeated firmly. "And I would like to use the first-class lavatory that I paid for access to." Connor stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Look, I don't want any trouble. The economy lavatories are that way. He gestured toward the back of the plane. There is no trouble, Elise said, her voice steady despite the growing tension. I simply need to use the restroom that I am entitled to use as a first-class passenger. What happened next stunned everyone who witnessed it. Connor placed his hands on Elise's shoulders and physically turned her around, pushing her toward the economy section. Your kind needs to use the facilities back there, he said, his voice low but audible to those nearby. A collective gasp rose from several passengers. Thomas Keller half rose from his seat, his face registering shock. Elise froze, feeling the physical contact like a jolt of electricity. In her 15 years on the federal bench, in her entire legal career, no one had dared to put their hands on her person. The shock of it, the violation and public humiliation, momentarily rendered her speechless. Connor seemed to realize he had crossed a line. He removed his hands immediately, but the damage was done. Did you just put your hands on me? Elise asked, her voice quieter now but with an edge of steel. Ma'am, I was simply directing you to the appropriate facilities, Connor replied, defensive now. If you continue to be disruptive, I'll need to report this to the captain. Elise looked him directly in the eyes. I am not being disruptive. You have just physically assaulted a passenger. That is both a violation of airline policy and potentially a criminal offense. I did not assault you, Connor scoffed. I was doing my job. Rather than escalate the confrontation further, Elise turned and walked back to her seat. She didn't look left or right, didn't acknowledge the stares of the other passengers. She maintained the dignity that had carried her through Harvard Law School as one of only 7 black women in her class, through her years as a litigator facing hostile judges, through her confirmation hearings for the federal bench where senators questioned whether she could be impartial, given her race and gender. Once seated, she took out her phone and disabled airplane mode. While this violated airline policy, at this moment, she had a more pressing concern. She scrolled through her contacts and placed a call. Robert, it's Elise Montgomery, I need your help. Thomas Keller watched the confrontation unfold with mounting discomfort. When Connor actually pushed Judge Montgomery, something snapped in the tech CEO's usually cautious demeanor. He'd witnessed subtle discrimination many times in his 20-year career but had rarely intervened, telling himself it wasn't his place or that he might be misinterpreting situations. This time, there was no ambiguity. He closed his laptop with a decisive click and stood up. That was completely unacceptable, he stated loudly enough for everyone in first class to hear. You cannot put your hands on a passenger like that. Connor's face flushed. Sir, please return to your seat. I'm handling a disruptive passenger situation. The only disruption I've witnessed is coming from you, Thomas replied firmly. This woman is clearly a first-class passenger. She's been sitting across from me since we boarded. Connor's expression hardened. Mr. Keller, with all due respect, this doesn't concern you. Please return to your seat immediately. From the galley, a younger flight attendant watched the scene with visible distress. Her name tag read, Marissa Jackson. She was white, probably in her mid-20s, and her eyes darted between Connor and the passengers with growing alarm. Connor, she said quietly, maybe I should take over the first-class service for a while. Stay out of this, Marissa, Connor snapped. Go check on the passengers in economy. Marissa hesitated, clearly torn between following her colleague's direction and addressing what she recognized as a problematic situation. With obvious reluctance, she moved toward the economy section. Thomas Keller didn't back down. I'm going to speak with the captain about this incident when we land, and I expect the airline will want to review the security footage. He gestured toward the ceiling where a small camera was mounted near the cockpit door. Connor's confidence faltered momentarily as he glanced at the camera, but he quickly recovered. The cameras are for security purposes only, not for monitoring crew performance. Now please return to your seat before I report you as well. Thomas sat down, but the determined look on his face suggested this matter was far from over. He pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly, presumably documenting what he'd witnessed. Meanwhile, a distinguished-looking black woman in her 40s made her way from economy toward the first-class section. She moved with confidence, nodding politely to Marissa, who had just begun serving drinks in economy. The woman approached the first-class lavatory, which was now unoccupied. Connor immediately moved to intercept her. "Excuse me, ma'am. The first-class facilities are for first-class passengers only." The woman smiled pleasantly. "I understand. Flight attendant Marissa said I could use this one since there's a line for both lavatories in economy. I won't be but a moment." Connor glanced back toward economy, where Marissa was busy with the beverage cart, unable to verify this claim. Before he could object further, Thomas Keller spoke up again. "The lavatory is unoccupied, and no first-class passengers are waiting to use it. What exactly is the problem?" Connor's jaw tightened, but with both passengers challenging him, he reluctantly stepped aside. "Make it quick," he told the woman curtly. As the woman passed by Elise's seat, their eyes met briefly. A flash of recognition crossed the woman's face, though she didn't speak. When she emerged from the lavatory a few minutes later, she paused near Elise's row. "Judge Montgomery?" she said quietly. "Dr. Amelia Richardson. You presided over the Williams medical malpractice case last year." Elise nodded with a small smile of recognition. "Dr. Richardson? Of course." Dr. Richardson leaned closer and lowered her voice. "I saw what happened. That was completely unprofessional and discriminatory behavior. If you need a witness, I'd be happy to provide my contact information." "Thank you, Dr. Richardson. That would be very helpful." They exchanged a knowing look, the silent solidarity of professional black women who had each navigated predominantly white spaces throughout their careers. As Dr. Richardson turned to head back to economy, Connor approached again. "Ma'am, please return to your assigned section." "Of course," Dr. Richardson replied with a pleasant smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for your assistance." Once she had returned to economy, Marissa made her way back to the first-class galley. While Connor was occupied with another passenger's request, she discreetly approached Elise with a napkin and a fresh glass of water, this time properly prepared with ice and lemon. "I'm so sorry about what happened," Marissa whispered as she placed the items on Elise's tray. "That was completely inappropriate." Before Elise could respond, Marissa slipped a folded cocktail napkin under the drink. Then she quickly moved away as Connor returned to the galley. Elise unfolded the napkin discreetly. Written inside was a note. "I witnessed everything. Marissa Jackson, employee ID 45721. Happy to be a witness if needed." From economy, Dr. Richardson had returned to her seat and was engaged in quiet conversation with several surrounding passengers. Occasionally, one would glance toward the first-class cabin with expressions ranging from curiosity to outrage. Have you ever witnessed someone standing up against injustice when it would have been easier to stay silent? If you believe Thomas Keller did the right thing by speaking up. Comment number 1. If you think Dr. Richardson was brave for offering to be a witness, hit that like button and subscribe to see what happens next in this explosive situation. But what about the phone call Judge Montgomery made? Who did she call? And what powers were about to be unleashed on this routine flight? And most importantly, will Connor face any consequences for his actions? Or will this be yet another incident swept under the rug? The tension is building, but you won't believe what happens next. Captain James Foster was halfway through his third cup of coffee when his co-pilot, First Officer Daniela Rodriguez, turned to him with a puzzled expression. "Captain, I just received a priority communication from headquarters." Foster frowned. Mid-flight communications from the corporate office were unusual, unless there was a mechanical issue, security concern, or severe weather ahead. "What's it about?" he asked, setting down his coffee. "They're instructing us to divert to Cleveland Hopkins. No explanation provided, just that it's a priority directive coming directly from the executive office." Foster's 25 years. A flying experience hadn't prepared him for this type of situation. Executive office, as in the CEO? That's what it says, priority level alpha. Foster had never received an alpha priority directive in his entire career. Any mechanical issues showing up on the indicators? All systems normal. Rodriguez. Confirmed. Weather looks clear all the way to DC. Foster rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Any unusual activity in the cabin that security might be concerned about? Nothing reported by the cabin crew. Foster keyed his radio to communicate with air traffic control, requesting clearance for the unscheduled diversion. Within minutes, they had permission to alter course for Cleveland. Meanwhile, in the main cabin, Connor Williams was becoming increasingly agitated. The senior flight attendant, Victoria Weber, had pulled him aside for a whispered conversation after she noticed the tension in first class. "What's going on up here?" Victoria asked. With 28 years of experience, the 55-year-old flight attendant had seen it all and prided herself on maintaining control of her cabin. "Just a disruptive passenger situation," Connor replied. "Some economy passenger trying to use the first-class lavatory, making a scene when I redirected her." Victoria glanced at Elise, who was calmly reviewing documents. "She's in first class now." "She must have moved seats when I wasn't looking," Connor said quickly. "I'll check her boarding pass again." Victoria nodded. "Make sure you follow protocol. Document everything." As Victoria moved away, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Foster speaking. Due to an unexpected situation, we will be making an unscheduled landing at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts as we begin our descent. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing." A murmur of confusion and concern spread through the aircraft. They were only an hour into what should have been a 2-hour flight, and Cleveland was not on their route. Connor's face drained of color. He hurried to where Victoria was securing items in the galley. "Why are we diverting?" he asked, his voice tense. "I have no idea," Victoria replied. "Captain didn't notify the crew before the announcement." Connor's eyes darted to Elise, who remained composed, reviewing her papers as if an unscheduled landing was of no concern to her. "It's her," Connor said suddenly. "She made a phone call earlier. I saw her." Victoria looked skeptical. "Passengers can't make calls in flight. The signal doesn't work at this altitude." "She did something," Connor insisted. "She's been trouble since she boarded." Victoria sighed. "Connor, just prepare the cabin for landing. We'll sort this out on the ground." As the aircraft began its descent, Connor approached Elise's seat. His professional demeanor had completely evaporated, replaced by barely contained anger. "What did you do?" he demanded in a harsh whisper. Elise looked up calmly. "I'm sorry? You know what I'm talking about. Who did you call? Why are we landing in Cleveland?" "I suggest you prepare the cabin for landing as your captain instructed," Elise replied evenly. Connor leaned closer. "You think you're special? You think you can cause problems for me? I've been flying this route for 6 years. Nobody believes passengers like you over crew like me." Thomas Keller, overhearing this exchange, quietly took out his phone and began recording. Victoria appeared behind Connor, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Connor, secure the galley. I'll finish the cabin check." Connor straightened, giving Elise one last glare before complying with Victoria's direction. Victoria remained, looking down at Elise with a tight smile. "Ma'am, I understand there was some confusion earlier about the lavatory access. On behalf of SkyWest Airlines, I apologize for any misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," Elise replied. "Your colleague physically pushed me and made a discriminatory comment. That goes well beyond confusion." Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "I'm sure that's not what happened. Connor is one of our most experienced flight attendants. Perhaps you misinterpreted his guidance." "I did not misinterpret being physically pushed or being told that my kind should use the facilities in economy." Victoria leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen carefully. If you continue with these accusations, you could be met by airport police in Cleveland for interfering with a flight crew, which is a federal offense. Is that really how you want this to go?" Before Elise could respond, Dr. Richardson appeared in the aisle. "Excuse me," she said. "I couldn't help overhearing. I witnessed the incident, as did several other passengers in economy. Your flight attendant did indeed put his hands on this woman and make discriminatory comments." Victoria straightened, her expression cooling. Ma'am, please return to your seat immediately. We're preparing for landing. I'm going, but you should know that multiple passengers are documenting this situation. Dr. Richardson gestured toward Thomas Keller, who was still openly recording with his phone, and several economy passengers who had their phones out as well. Victoria's composure slipped momentarily before she regained control. Everyone needs to put away electronic devices for landing. That's an FAA regulation. Of course, Dr. Richardson said smoothly. But I believe the recordings have already been saved, and some even shared. She returned to her seat in economy. Victoria turned back to Elise. This is your last warning. Any further disruption will result in law enforcement involvement when we land. I understand completely, Elise replied. Then she added quietly, and I hope you understand that physically assaulting a federal judge in the performance of her duties carrying out Justice Department business is a federal offense with mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. Victoria's eyes widened fractionally before she masked her reaction. Without another word, she moved away to continue preparing the cabin for landing. As the plane descended toward Cleveland, Marissa found herself cornered in the rear galley by Victoria. What exactly did you witness in first class? Victoria demanded. Marissa shifted uncomfortably. I was serving economy when most of it happened. But you were there for some of it. Did you see Connor assault that woman as she claims? Marissa hesitated. Fresh out of training, with student loans to repay and a promising career ahead of her, she faced an impossible choice. Tell the truth and potentially lose her job, or lie to protect a colleague who had clearly acted inappropriately. I saw Connor guiding the passenger, she said carefully. I didn't hear what was said. Victoria nodded approvingly. Good. We stick together as a crew. Remember that. The plane touched down smoothly at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport. Instead of taxiing to a terminal, however, it rolled to a stop in a designated area away from the main buildings. Through the windows, passengers could see multiple vehicles with flashing lights waiting on the tarmac. Captain Foster's high voice came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived safely in Cleveland. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We've been instructed to keep everyone on board until further notice. Thank you for your patience and cooperation. Connor rushed to the first-class galley where Victoria was waiting. Airport, police, he asked, peering out at the vehicles. Probably, Victoria replied. Don't worry. We'll explain the situation. Unruly passenger, potential security threat, standard procedure. But as they watched, it became clear these weren't standard airport police vehicles. A black SUV with federal government plates had pulled up alongside the plane. Connor's confidence began to crumble. What's happening? Victoria had no answer. For the first time in her long career, she felt a tremor of uncertainty. In her seat, Elise Montgomery sat perfectly still, her expression revealing nothing as the drama she had set in motion began to unfold. The aircraft door opened to reveal not airport police, but three individuals in professional attire. The first was a stern-looking man in his 50s wearing a SkyWest Airlines executive badge that identified him as Raymond Patel, Director of Security Operations. Behind him stood a woman in her 40s, her Federal Aviation Administration credentials prominently displayed. Diana Mitchell, Regional Compliance Officer. The third was a tall black man whose FBI badge identified him as Special Agent Marcus Jones. The captain met them at the door, clearly confused by the high-level response team boarding his aircraft. Captain Foster, Raymond Patel said briskly. We need to speak with two of your flight attendants, Connor Williams and Victoria Weber, and a passenger in first class. Victoria stepped forward, the consummate professional despite her growing concern. I'm Victoria Weber, lead flight attendant. How can I assist you? We've received a serious complaint about an incident aboard this aircraft, Patel explained, his expression grave. For now, we need all passengers to remain seated. Agent Jones scanned the first-class cabin until his eyes landed on Elise, who met his gaze calmly. He approached her seat and spoke quietly. Judge Montgomery? I'm Agent Marcus Jones, FBI. Elise nodded and presented her federal judicial identification. Thank you for responding so quickly, Agent Jones. Connor, watching this exchange from the galley, felt the blood drain from his face. "Judge?" he whispered to Victoria. "She's a judge?" Victoria's expression remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the counter. "Federal judges fly commercial all the time. It doesn't change anything. We followed protocol." Agent Jones returned to the front of the aircraft and conversed quietly with Patel and Mitchell. After a brief discussion, Patel addressed the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the inconvenience. We need to investigate a reported incident that occurred on this flight. This will require interviewing several passengers and crew members. To expedite this process, we'll be deplaning everyone except those directly involved. Ground staff will assist you with connecting flights or accommodations if necessary." As passengers began gathering their belongings, Mitchell approached Connor and Victoria. "We'll need to speak with both of you once the aircraft is clear." "Of course," Victoria replied smoothly. "We have nothing to hide. There was a minor misunderstanding with a passenger that's been blown completely out of proportion." Mitchell's expression revealed nothing. "We'll discuss the details shortly." Agent Jones approached Thomas Keller. "Sir, we understand you witnessed the incident. Would you be willing to provide a statement?" "Absolutely," Thomas replied, closing his laptop. "I recorded part of it as well." Jones nodded appreciatively. "That would be extremely helpful." Dr. Richardson had made her way to first class as passengers began deplaning. "Agent, I witnessed the incident as well, as did several passengers in my section of economy." "Thank you, ma'am. We'd like to speak with you and any other witnesses." Within 30 minutes, the aircraft was empty except for the flight crew, Elise, Thomas, Dr. Richardson, and a few economy passengers who had offered to provide statements. The remaining group was escorted to a private conference room in the airport terminal. In an adjacent room, Connor and Victoria sat across from Patel and Mitchell. Connor's earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by visible anxiety. "Let me be clear about the seriousness of this situation," Patel began. "We have a report that a SkyWest flight attendant physically assaulted a passenger and made discriminatory comments." "That's absolutely false," Victoria interjected. "Connor was simply maintaining cabin order and directing passengers to their appropriate lavatories, as per SkyWest policy." "Ms. Weber," Mitchell said, "we have multiple witness statements contradicting that account. Passengers often misinterpret flight attendants' actions, especially when they're being redirected or asked to follow rules they don't like," Victoria argued. "The passenger in question was seated in first class," Mitchell countered, reviewing her notes. "According to the manifest, she held a valid first-class ticket. Can you explain why she was directed to use the economy lavatory?" Connor shifted uncomfortably. "There must have been a misunderstanding. I thought she was from economy trying to use the first-class facilities." "Despite the fact that she was seated in first class since boarding?" Mitchell's skepticism was evident. "And what about the physical contact? Did you place your hands on this passenger?" "I may have guided her direction, but I certainly didn't push her," Connor insisted. "And I would never make discriminatory comments. That's absurd." In another conference room, Marissa sat alone, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The ethical dilemma she faced was excruciating. Connor had been unhelpful during her training, occasionally making comments that made her uncomfortable, but Victoria had been a mentor. If she told the truth, she would be betraying a senior colleague who could make or break her career. If she lied, she would be complicit in covering up discrimination. The door opened, and Agent Jones entered. "Ms. Jackson, I'm Agent Jones with the FBI. I understand you witnessed part of the incident on the aircraft." "Yes, sir," Marissa replied nervously. "Please understand that making false statements to a federal officer is a serious offense," Jones said, his tone gentle but firm. "I need you to tell me exactly what you saw and heard." Meanwhile, in the main conference room, Elise Montgomery was providing her account to Diana Mitchell while Raymond Patel listened intently. "After Mr. Williams refused to let me use the first-class lavatory, I attempted to explain that I was, indeed, a first-class passenger. That's when he placed his hands on my shoulders and physically pushed me toward economy, stating, and I quote, Your kind needs to use the facilities back there. And you're certain about that exact phrasing? Mitchell asked. I am. Those words are burned into my memory. Patel's phone buzzed with a message. He scanned it quickly, his expression darkening. Judge Montgomery, I've just been informed that our CEO has received a call from Chief United States District Judge Robert Williams regarding this incident. Was that your call from the aircraft? It was, Elise confirmed. Robert and I have been colleagues for 15 years. When I realized the severity of what had occurred, I felt it necessary to report it immediately to someone who could ensure it received proper attention. I see, Patel said. And you made this call during the flight? I did. After being physically assaulted by your employee, I felt my safety was at risk and that the situation required immediate intervention. The door opened, and a harried-looking woman in her early 40s entered. I'm Stephanie Morris, Regional Director for SkyWest. Judge Montgomery, on behalf of the airline, I want to extend our deepest apologies for any mistreatment you experienced. I appreciate that, Ms. Morris, Elise replied evenly. Though I must point out that until a few minutes ago, your employees were threatening me with arrest for causing disruption. Morris winced visibly. That is completely unacceptable and will be addressed immediately. Thomas Keller cleared his throat. I believe this might be relevant. He placed his phone on the table. I recorded part of the interaction where Mr. Williams approached Judge Montgomery after the captain announced our diversion. His demeanor was hostile and accusatory. Everyone in the room listened as Connor's voice played clearly from the recording. You think you're special? You think you can cause problems for me? I've been flying this route for 6 years. Nobody believes passengers like you over crew like me. Morris closed her eyes briefly, the PR disaster unfolding before her growing worse by the minute. I also have this, Elise said, removing her phone from her purse. When I realized the situation was escalating, I activated my voice recording app. She played the recording, and Connor's voice filled the room. Your kind needs to use the facilities. Back there. Connor and Victoria, being interviewed in the adjacent room, were unaware of these developments. Connor maintained his version of events, becoming increasingly defensive. I never said that, Connor insisted when confronted with the accusation. She's making this up to get special treatment. Are you suggesting a federal judge would fabricate evidence? Mitchell asked incredulously. Victoria intervened. What Connor means is that his words might have been misinterpreted. The cabin is loud, conversations can be misheard. Patel leaned forward. Ms. Weber, I need to ask about some previous incidents. We've been reviewing Mr. Williams's personnel file. There appear to be several passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment that were filed but never escalated beyond your initial review. Can you explain that? Victoria stiffened. Those complaints were thoroughly investigated and found to be without merit. Passengers often claim discrimination when they're simply being asked to follow airline policies. All 6 complaints in the last year. All determined to be without merit by you personally. A light knock at the door interrupted their conversation. An assistant entered and handed Patel a tablet, then whispered something in his ear. Patel's expression changed as he reviewed the information. Ms. Weber, did you know that SkyWest has a policy requiring all discrimination complaints to be forwarded to HR, regardless of the initial finding? Victoria's composure finally cracked. Those complaints were minor. Nothing worth bothering. HR about? That wasn't your decision to make, Patel replied coldly. And now we have a federal judge who's been physically assaulted by your flight attendant, with multiple witnesses and recordings confirming her account. Connor looked at Victoria in mounting panic. You said you'd handle those other complaints. You said they wouldn't go any further. Victoria shot him a warning look, but it was too late. Their united front had crumbled. So let me understand this correctly, Stephanie Morris said, addressing the room of witnesses. Not only did Mr. Williams physically push Judge Montgomery and direct discriminatory language toward her, but there appears to be a pattern of similar behavior that Ms. Weber systematically covered up? The evidence against Connor and Victoria had mounted rapidly over the past hour. Thomas Keller's video had been clear and damning. Dr. Richardson and her fellow economy passengers had provided consistent accounts of what they'd witnessed. But perhaps most devastating was Marissa Jackson's testimony. Are you wondering what finally made Marissa speak up against her colleagues? Would you have found the courage to tell the truth in her position? Comment number 1 if you believe standing up for what's right is always worth the potential consequences. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed discrimination and wish you'd said something. And subscribe to see more stories of people facing injustice and fighting back. The young flight attendant had entered the main conference room with tears in her eyes but determination in her voice. "I can't be part of this anymore," she had said. "During my training, Connor made several comments about certain passengers not belonging in first class. Victoria told me never to escalate complaints from those passengers because they were playing the race card to get upgrades or special treatment." Marissa presented her own documentation, a journal of incidents she'd witnessed during her 6 months with the airline. "I kept these notes because something felt wrong, but I was afraid to speak up. This industry is competitive, and Victoria has connections throughout the airline." Raymond Patel reviewed her notes with growing concern. "Ms. Jackson, why didn't you report these incidents to HR directly?" Victoria told all new flight attendants that complaints had to go through her first. She said if we went around her, we'd be labeled not a team player and would never advance. Marissa wiped away a tear. "I needed this job, I still do, but I can't stay silent about this." Diana Mitchell from the FAA typed rapidly on her laptop. "This suggests a systematic failure in SkyWest's discrimination reporting procedures, not just individual misconduct." Victoria, now separated from Connor and interviewed alone, attempted to shift blame. "Connor has always been a bit abrupt with passengers, but I had no idea he was making explicitly discriminatory comments. If I had known, I would have reported him immediately." When presented with Marissa's journal and the pattern of buried complaints, Victoria changed tactics. "As senior flight attendant, my primary concern is maintaining harmony among the crew. Yes, I may have used discretion in handling minor complaints rather than overwhelming HR with every small issue. Physically pushing a passenger and making racist comments is not a small issue," Patel countered. Victoria's defense crumbled. Further, when Agent Jones presented findings from a quick background check. "Ms. Weber, our records show you share ownership of a vacation property with James Peterson, SkyWest's regional manager for crew affairs, the same person who would have received these discrimination complaints had you forwarded them properly." The revelation of this conflict of interest silenced Victoria's protestations. Meanwhile, Connor's interview had devolved into increasingly desperate excuses. "I've been working 16-hour days all week. I was tired. Maybe I wasn't as patient as I should have been." When confronted with the recording of his "your kind" comment, he claimed, "I meant economy passengers. It had nothing to do with race." This explanation fell apart when investigators reviewed the complete passenger manifest and seating assignments, confirming Elise had been assigned to first class and properly seated there from the beginning of the flight. As the testimonies continued, Elise Montgomery remained composed, her legal training evident in her methodical responses and precise recall of events. When asked why she had called Judge Robert Williams specifically, her answer was straightforward. "As the chief judge of our district and the head of the Judicial Conference's Committee on Airline Travel Safety for federal judges, he was the appropriate person to contact. Federal judges frequently travel for court business, and our safety, while performing these duties, is a matter of judicial security, not personal convenience." The mention of judicial security elevated the incident from a customer service failure to a potential federal offense, interfering with a judge in the performance of official duties. Stephanie Morris, growing paler by the minute, finally asked, "Judge Montgomery, what would you like to see happen here?" Before Elise could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Excuse me, I need to take this. It's the Chief Justice." The room fell silent as she stepped aside to take the call, the gravity of the situation becoming increasingly apparent to the airline executives. By evening, the story had exploded across social media and news outlets. Despite SkyWest's attempts to handle the situation discreetly, multiple passengers had shared their accounts online before even leaving Cleveland Airport. The trending hashtag, #DesirTraer, Justice at 36,000 feet spread like wildfire, accompanied by Thomas Keller's video clip, which had been uploaded to multiple platforms. His status as a well-known tech CEO lent additional credibility to the story, and his following of over 2 million. Business professionals ensured the incident reached a massive audience within hours. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News all ran breaking stories about the incident. Headlines varied from "Federal Judge Physically Assaulted on Commercial Flight" to "SkyWest Airlines Faces Federal Investigation for Discriminatory Practices." SkyWest's stock dropped 5% in after-hours trading as investors reacted to the potential financial and reputational damage. The airline's PR team scrambled to contain the crisis, issuing a carefully worded statement. SkyWest Airlines is aware of an incident involving a passenger on Flight 3792. We take all allegations of discriminatory treatment extremely seriously and are conducting a thorough investigation. The employees involved have been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of this investigation. SkyWest is committed to providing a safe, respectful environment for all passengers. The statement did little to quell the growing outrage. Social media was flooded with stories from other passengers who claimed to have experienced similar treatment on SkyWest flights. The hashtag #JohnFlyingWhileBlack began trending alongside Justice at 36,000 feet as people shared their own encounters with racial bias in air travel. In a Cleveland hotel suite, SkyWest CEO Theodore Richards convened an emergency meeting with his executive team. "How bad is this?" he demanded. Stephanie Morris, who had been handling the situation on the ground, looked exhausted. "It's worse than bad, Ted. We have irrefutable evidence of discrimination by our staff, a systematic cover-up by a senior flight attendant, and the victim is not only a federal judge, but one who specializes in civil rights cases." "What's Judge Montgomery asking for?" Richards asked. "That's the strange part," Morris replied. "She hasn't made any specific demands yet. Our legal team offered a private settlement, first-class travel for life, a substantial cash payment, formal apology, but she declined. She said this isn't about her personal experience, but about addressing a systemic problem." Richards rubbed his temples. "The board is in panic mode. We're facing potential class action lawsuits, federal civil rights investigations, and God knows what else. We need to get ahead of this. The media is requesting statements from you personally," the communications director added. "They want to know why the airline allowed this pattern of behavior to continue unchecked." Outside the hotel, news vans had already gathered. Social media was amplifying the story with every passing hour. Aviation industry analysts were speculating about long-term damage to SkyWest's brand and financial health. Connor Williams and Victoria Weber had both retained legal counsel. Their attorney, Jeffrey Simmons, was known for defending high-profile discrimination cases, often by attacking the credibility of those claiming bias. His statement to the press suggested this approach. "My clients categorically deny any discriminatory intent. This situation has been greatly exaggerated and taken out of context for what appears to be personal gain." This statement backfired dramatically when a Supreme Court justice, who had mentored Elise early in her career, called into a cable news program to voice support. Judge Montgomery is one of the most principled jurists I know. The suggestion that she would fabricate or exaggerate such an incident for personal gain is not only false but defamatory. Early in my own career, I experienced similar treatment while traveling for court business. Many of us have simply endured it quietly. Perhaps it's time that changed. By morning, the story had made international news. SkyWest's competitors began offering special promotions, emphasizing their commitment to respectful service for all passengers. The financial impact was mounting by the hour. Richards made a difficult decision. "We're going to terminate Connor and Victoria immediately, issue a public statement acknowledging the failure, and announcing a comprehensive review of our training and complaint procedures." "Will that be enough?" Morris asked. "It's just the beginning," Richards replied grimly. "But it's a start." SkyWest Airlines announces the immediate termination of 2 employees involved in a discriminatory incident aboard Flight 3792. The airline has zero tolerance for bias or discrimination of any kind and deeply regrets the experience of Judge Elise Montgomery and any other passengers who have faced similar treatment. The press release continued with promises of enhanced training, improved reporting procedures, and an independent audit of the airline's handling of discrimination complaints. But for many, these measures seemed like too little, too late. Connor, Williams and Victoria Weber's attorney, held a press conference the same day. "My clients are being scapegoated for systemic issues within the airline industry. They intend to fight their wrongful termination and clear their names." Most media commentators were skeptical of this defense, especially after more passengers came forward with similar experiences, several involving Connor specifically. Former SkyWest employees began speaking out anonymously about Victoria's pattern of suppressing discrimination complaints. Judge Montgomery had maintained public silence until now, declining all interview requests. 3 days after the incident, she agreed to a single interview with a respected journalist known for covering civil rights issues. "I want to be clear that this is not about me or my experience," she began. "I'm in the privileged position of having the resources and connections to ensure this incident wasn't ignored like so many others. But what about the countless travelers who don't have a direct line to airline executives? What about those who are routinely humiliated, discriminated against, or made to feel unwelcome simply because of their race?" The interviewer asked if she was satisfied with SkyWest's response. "Firing 2 employees doesn't address the underlying issues," Elise replied. "This incident revealed a systematic failure in how discrimination complaints were handled. One senior employee shouldn't have had the power to bury multiple reports without oversight. The problem goes beyond individual bias to institutional structures that allow that bias to flourish unchecked." True to her word, Elise had filed formal complaints with the Federal Aviation Administration, Department of Transportation, and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Each would conduct independent investigations into SkyWest's practices. Thomas Keller announced that Keller Technologies' corporate travel policy would exclude SkyWest until the airline demonstrated meaningful reform. "As a company committed to diversity and inclusion, we cannot in good conscience continue to do business with an organization that has allowed discriminatory practices to go unchallenged." Several other major corporations followed suit. Dr. Richardson leveraged her connections in the medical community to organize a similar boycott among professional medical associations, which frequently booked group travel for conferences. "Until SkyWest can prove it treats all passengers with equal dignity and respect, we will take our considerable business elsewhere." These actions hit SkyWest where it hurt most, its bottom line. The airline primarily serviced business travelers, and corporate accounts represented a significant portion of its revenue. As more organizations joined the boycott, the financial pressure mounted. Marissa Jackson, who had risked her career to testify truthfully, faced an uncertain future. Her honesty had burned bridges with former colleagues, many of whom viewed her as a traitor. However, when Judge Montgomery learned of her situation, she unexpectedly reached out. "Ms. Jackson, your courage in coming forward was instrumental in exposing a serious injustice," Elise told her during a private meeting. "As it happens, the Department of Transportation has a whistleblower protection program for aviation employees who report safety or civil rights violations. I'd like to connect you with someone who can help ensure your career doesn't suffer, because you chose to do the right thing." Meanwhile, SkyWest scrambled to implement changes. They announced a new anti-bias training program for all customer-facing staff, revamped their complaint reporting system to prevent single-point suppression, and established an independent oversight committee to review discrimination allegations. Industry analysts remained skeptical. These changes appeared designed more to manage public perception than to address deep-seated cultural issues within the organization, noted one aviation consultant. Real transformation requires a fundamental shift in corporate values and accountability structures, not just new policies on paper. An independent investigation commissioned by SkyWest's board of directors revealed a disturbing pattern. Discrimination. Complaints from Black, Latino, and Middle Eastern passengers were substantiated at significantly lower rates than those from white passengers, despite similar evidence. The report also found that employees with multiple bias complaints often received promotions and favorable assignments, suggesting that such behavior was not treated as a serious performance issue. For SkyWest, the consequences continued to unfold. Beyond the immediate financial impact of the boycotts and negative publicity, they faced potential class action lawsuits from passengers who had experienced similar discrimination. The federal investigations could result in fines and mandated oversight. The reputational damage would linger long after the headlines faded. For Connor and Victoria, the consequences were career-ending. No airline would touch them after the very public termination and ongoing controversy. Their wrongful termination lawsuit faced dim prospects given the overwhelming evidence against them. But for Judge Montgomery, the incident had opened an unexpected new chapter in her already distinguished career. The attention had shined a light on an issue that affected countless travelers, but had rarely received sustained public attention. She found herself uniquely positioned to advocate for structural change within an industry that had long tolerated subtle and not-so-subtle forms of discrimination. 6 months after Flight 3792 was diverted to Cleveland, Judge Elise Montgomery stood at a podium in Dallas, addressing the annual conference of the International Aviation Service Association. The audience included executives from major airlines, worldwide, industry regulators, and service training specialists. "The incident that brought me to your attention was not unique," she began. "What made it unusual was that it couldn't be ignored, dismissed, or swept away with a form letter apology and discount voucher. But for countless travelers, these experiences of discrimination are routine. Small indignities they're expected to endure as the price of mobility in our society." In the half-year since the incident, much had changed. SkyWest had implemented what became known as the Montgomery Protocol, a comprehensive framework for preventing bias, reporting incidents, and ensuring accountability at all levels of the organization. The protocol included several key elements: mandatory quarterly bias training based on real scenarios, an anonymous reporting system that flagged patterns of behavior even when individual incidents might seem minor, and a review board that included diverse community representatives to evaluate policies and complaint resolutions. Most importantly, the protocol established clear consequences for discriminatory behavior and for failures to properly address complaints. Performance evaluations and promotion decisions explicitly incorporated metrics related to inclusive customer service. "The measure of success isn't the absence of bias incidents," Elise told the assembled aviation leaders. "We all have biases. Success is creating systems that prevent those biases from harming others, that catch problems early, and that respond to failures with genuine accountability rather than damage control." Connor Williams and Victoria Weber's wrongful termination lawsuit had been dismissed by the court. The judge cited the overwhelming evidence of discriminatory behavior and violation of company policies. However inconsistently those policies had been enforced in the past. Marissa Jackson had not only kept her career but thrived. Recognized for her integrity, she had been promoted to a newly created position, customer experience specialist with a focus on inclusive service. She now helped design the very training programs that would prevent incidents like the one she had witnessed. "When I spoke up, I thought I was ending my career," Marissa told a group of new flight attendants during their training. "Instead, I found my purpose within it. Every time you intervene when you see someone being treated unfairly, you're not just helping that person, you're building a better industry for all of us." Thomas Keller had taken his commitment a step further. Keller Technologies was developing an artificial intelligence system to help service industries identify patterns of discriminatory treatment before they escalated. The system analyzed customer feedback, complaint resolutions, and service metrics to flag potential bias blind spots. "Technology can't solve human bias," he acknowledged during a tech conference presentation. "But it can help us see patterns we might otherwise miss or dismiss, especially when those patterns affect people different from those in positions of power." Dr. Richardson had established the Equal Care Initiative, an advocacy group focused on addressing discrimination in both transportation and healthcare settings. "These systems share a common feature," she explained in a TED Talk that went viral. "They both involve vulnerable people placing their trust in professionals who hold significant power over their experience and outcomes. That power imbalance demands particular vigilance against bias." For her part, Judge Montgomery had created a judicial education program specifically addressing transportation discrimination cases. "These issues rarely reach federal courtrooms," she explained to her colleagues. But when they do, it's important that judges understand the systemic nature of these experiences rather than viewing them as isolated incidents. As part of her ongoing advocacy, Elise occasionally shared the story that had inspired her own commitment to transportation equity. Her father, William Montgomery, had been one of the celebrated Tuskegee Airmen during World War II. "My father flew combat missions defending a country that wouldn't allow him to sit at the front of a bus when he returned home," she would tell audiences. "He trained white pilots who could enter airports through the main terminal while he was directed to service entrances. He never lived to see his daughter become a federal judge, but he taught me that dignity isn't something others can take from you, only something you can forfeit by failing to stand up for what's right." On the anniversary of the SkyWest incident, Elise boarded another flight for a judicial conference. As she settled into her first-class seat, the lead flight attendant approached with a warm smile of recognition. "Judge Montgomery, I'm honored to serve you today. I just completed your training program last month." The young man, who happened to be Latino, continued. "Thank you for making the skies more just for everyone, passengers and crew alike." Elise smiled, thinking of her father's words that had guided her throughout her life and career. Change doesn't come from enduring injustice quietly, but from ensuring no one else has to face it again. This story shows us that real change often requires people with power to use their privilege to challenge systemic discrimination. Judge Montgomery could have simply endured the mistreatment like countless others before her, but she chose to take action that would create lasting impact. The ripple effects of standing up against racism extend far beyond individual incidents, potentially transforming entire institutions. We also see how silence and inaction perpetuate discrimination. Victoria's suppression of complaints and Thomas Keller's initial hesitation to speak up allowed harmful behavior to continue unchecked. By contrast, Marissa's courage to tell the truth despite personal risk demonstrates how one person's integrity can help dismantle discriminatory systems. Perhaps most importantly, the story reminds us that addressing racism requires more than just punishing individual offenders. True transformation comes from examining and reforming the structures that allow bias to flourish, creating accountability systems, amplifying marginalized voices, and establishing clear consequences for discriminatory behavior at every level. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wondered what you should do? Would you have spoken up like Marissa, or stayed silent to protect your career? Comment below with your thoughts on what responsibility we all share in confronting racism when we see it. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about justice and accountability. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the importance of speaking up against discrimination, because change only happens when brave people refuse to accept the status quo. Thank you for listening, and remember, your voice matters in the fight for equality.